The 1999 Braunston Boat Show coincided with the 90th birthday celebrations for the narrowboat president. To commemorate the event, she, along with her buddy Kildare, completed a fly run from Birmingham to Braunston, where she officially opened the show, steered through the marina by avid canal enthusiast David Suchet, better known as Hercule Poirot. President was built in 1909 for carrying company Fellows Morton and Clayton at a cost of just £600. Originally, she had a compound steam engine and coke-fired boiler, but this was replaced in 1925 by the compact Swedish Bolander crude oil engine. With this modification, President became part of the FMC motorised fleet and was painted in the newly introduced colour scheme of red, yellow and green. Kildare is a butty boat built in 1913 at a cost of £190. She was horse-drawn as well as being towed by steamers and diesel-engined boats. Kildare was built by Braithwaite and Kirk in West Bromwich for the FMC, one of 24 similar composite butties with wrought iron sides and an elm bottom. She traded throughout the canal system, carrying a variety of cargoes. Advertised for sale as a derelict hull in 1973, President was bought by Nicholas Bostock and Malcolm Brain for restoration to its original appearance, complete with working steam plant. After extensive repairs to the hull and building a complete replica cabin and boiler room, the major difficulty was finding a suitable engine and boiler, because the originals had long been scrapped. A 1928 vintage Muir and Finley boiler of Scotch return type, virtually identical to the original, but working at 100 psi, was installed along with a contemporary simple twin-cylinder steam engine, originally from a Thames launch. The boiler is fed with filtered canal water by a 1927 Worthington Simpson horizontal steam pump. The President Steamer Company operated the boat from 1978 as a museum piece throughout the canal system. President was bought by the Black Country Living Museum in January 1983. Friends of President was formed in October 1984 to assist in the operation and maintenance of this unique vessel. In 1990, the Muir and Finley boiler was replaced by a Cochrane dryback return flue boiler. In September 1991, Kildare was bought by the Black Country Living Museum, aided by Friends of President and a Science Museum grant. In early 1992, she was extensively renovated and returned to her original FMC appearance. Although outwardly she resembles a fully clothed working narrowboat, Kildare has been fitted out to provide accommodation and support facilities for President. Corona is a Star-class Woolwich motorboat launched in 1935 at Woolwich for the GUCCC. She was built with the butty Coronis at Holland and Wolff as part of an order for 18 pairs of composite boats with iron sides and elm bottoms. She was engaged in carrying for the GUCCC until passing to the maintenance fleet. Corona was sold by British Waterways around 1960 to Coventry Education Committee, who used her for school trips. She was purchased by Trevor Maggs of Rugby on January the 1st, 1968. Corona was re-engined with the Lister HR2 in 1970, and the original wooden cabin was replaced with a steel one in 1980. The elm bottoms were replaced with 10mm steel in 1984. Corona has been in regular use making coal deliveries since 1970 with her owner Trevor Maggs. Adamant is a replica based on a Preston Brook steam tunnel tug. The original tugs had locomotive boilers, and some had horizontal guide wheels to enable travel through the tunnels without steering. Adamant has a single-cylinder Sissons engine and a 3-drum water tube boiler. The engine was originally in the Thames launch Victoria. The hull is converted from a Birmingham Canal navigation day boat. The original tugs had only numbers, but Adamant is named after a naval survey ship of 1909. She's owned by Philip Martino from Cambridge. A Grand Union little Woolwich type built in 1935, Cassiopeia remained in the carrying fleet after nationalisation until British Waterways gave up the main part of their narrowboat traffics in the southeast in 1963. She was sold off and fitted with a houseboat conversion, which was later removed in 1980. The original engine was a National 18 horsepower, changed to a 20 horsepower Petter PD2 in 1960, which it still retains. Alton is a large Woolwich motorboat built in 1936 for the GUCC. Registered in Coventry as number 537. She was skippered initially by Elf and Rose Bavington and their 8 children. She was worked between London and Birmingham for the GUCC and British Waterways, and later for Willow Wren in both the southeastern and northwest fleets. She was restored from derelict in 1971 by the Narrowboat Trust, and she carried various cargoes for them until she was sold to the present owner in 1994. A second restoration is now taking place. She's now based on the Upper Peak Forest Canal. Dane was built in 1907 as a horseboat by the Severn and Canal Carrying Company at Stourport on Severn. At this time it was named Bath, Fleet number 11. In 1929 it was rebuilt as a motorboat when the present 15 horsepower Bollander semi-diesel engine was installed. Following conversion to a motor, it carried no name, just a number, motor number 7. In 1948 it was sold to Thomas Clayton of Oldbury and converted to an oil boat by fitting watertight bulkheads and the distinctive decking for carrying bulk liquids. The bow was shortened because she was too long to go through one of the locks near Clayton's base, and she was given the name Dane and fleet number 18. In 1960 she was converted to a pleasure boat. She was purchased by the present owner in March 1977. Dane was restored to working condition in 1981 and the conversion was removed. Subsequently, she was repainted in authentic Oldbury-style Clayton livery, and in 1989 a fore-cabin was added to give additional accommodation. The decking was replaced in 1991 to restore her original appearance. Archimedes is a Star-class motorboat built by Holland and Wolff at Woolwich in 1935 and known as a small Woolwich. Built as number 12 of the GUCC fleet, her early history is uncertain. However, Archimedes saw service as a length boat with British Waterways in the late 50s and early 60s, before being purchased by Courage Breweries around 1964. her name was changed to Barleycorn, and she ran as a trip boat based at the Navigation Inn at Cosgrove. She was recabined in the early 70s and returned to working condition. Australia was the first iron composite boat to be built at the Fellows Morton and Clayton Yard at Saltby, Birmingham in 1894. Originally an open boat, a cabin was fitted in 1903 when it was paired with a steamer similar to President. She was in regular service until the mid-1940s. She was transferred to the Docks and Inland Waterways Executive of the British Transport Commission in 1948 and used for maintenance purposes. In 1960 she sank in deep water in Cheshire. She was raised from her muddy grave in 1987 and is seen here today in the company colour of her owner, Malcolm Burge. Enterprise No. 1 was formerly the FMC steamer Count, built in 1899. She was reconstructed in 1946 by Ernest Thomas of Walsall Limited for pulling coal trains to power stations on the Wolverhampton level. She pulled a trial load of 400 tons. Acquired in 1973 by B. Hales and Partners, the hull plates have been extensively repaired and the elm bottom replaced entirely using traditional materials and methods. The hull is 52 foot long with a 3 foot 3 inch draft and made of iron and elm composite. The cabin frames and deck are oak. The engine is a Gardner L2, developing 60 horsepower at 1200 RPM and built in 1931. Ben is a narrowboat built by Harris Brothers of Bumblehold, Dudley in 1934 as a cargo-carrying boat for the Talbot Garage Company of Kidderminster Limited, and originally carried coal for the carpet trade on the Staffs and Worcester Canal. Ben subsequently worked for T&S Element at Oldbury on the BCN and would have pulled 2 or more joeys or unpowered boats. Ben is unusual in being a full-length 70-foot motorboat. Most boats on the BCN were pulled by shorter tugs. Ben has a Lister CE engine built in 1938, which developed 16 horsepower at 1200 RPM. Dodona is an ex-Woolwich boat built in 1935 by Harland and Wolff as a butty, fleet number 269. Used by trainees in World War II, she was sold to British Waterways. Later sold on privately, she was shortened and used for pleasure cruising until she was sunk by vandals on the River Thames. In 1995, Dave and Norma Warden took possession and commenced restoring Dodona to the condition seen today as a 50-foot boat powered by a Lister SR3. Registered number 500 and built for the GUCC company, Centauri was launched on the 25th of July 1935. She's a little Woolwich class boat, originally 70 foot long and fitted with a National water-cooled engine. She was shortened to 35 foot in 1963 and then used to assist the dredging of the Grand Union Leicester line. She is currently fitted with a 30 horsepower air-cooled 2-cylinder HR Lister. Elstree is a large Woolwich with a Lister engine. She was built for GUCCC by Harland and Wolff in 1937, fleet number 139. Unfortunately, little is known about the first 20 years of her life. Elstree carried extensively on the Grand Union Canal between Birmingham and London in the early 1960s. She was then leased to Willow Wren from BW and used by a succession of owners to carry grain, coal, timber, etc. She was also used as a camping boat. Elstree was used commercially until 1995 and is currently undergoing conversion under the cloths by her present owners. Daphne is a Samuel Barlow motorboat built in Braunston in July 1938 by Frank Nurser for just £343.10, excluding the engine. She was completely rebuilt for the present owner, Mike Dobson. This wooden boat has a 1935 two-cylinder National engine. Restoration work continues. It's interesting to note the convention of naming motors after boys and butties after girls, except for Daphne and Raymond. One of the problems with parading such a huge gathering of commercial craft through the confines of Braunston Marina is the enormous traffic jam that from time to time has to be sorted out. Doobie 272 is an ex-Little Woolwich steel composite butty built in December 1935. She was originally a Star-class butty, Doobie being the name of a star in the constellation of the Plough. Her Grand Union number was 12462. She was originally paired with the motorboat Denebula. She was cut in two in the early 80s, both halves being converted into tug-style boats. This is the stern end with steelwork by Roger Farrington. James Loader is a 40-foot tugboat built by Joe Worsley of Walsall in 1946 of English oak and elm. She was one of a fleet of tugs owned by Leonard Lee and was named after his son James Loader Lee. Between 1947 and 1963, James Loader worked mainly in the Wolverhampton area, drawing trains of 4 or 5 joey boats, each loaded with 28 tons of coal. She is presently powered by a Gardner 2LW built in 1947. Mountbatten is an Admiral-class motorboat built by Yarwoods at Northwich, the last built for British Waterways. She represented a new functional design suitable for shallow waters. She was used in the Northern Division until 1976. Mountbatten won Best Working Boat in the 1969 Inland Waterways Rally. She's now been restored to Anderton livery by the present owner, Ivor Batchelor. Gainsborough steered here by waterways writer Ewan Corrie, is another motor narrowboat built by Harland & Wolff Limited at North Woolwich. She's one of a batch of 24 all-steel motorboats built for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company. She was delivered to GUCCC's Fleet Depot at Bullsbridge, Southall on March the 24th, 1937, and fitted with a national 2DM twin-cylinder marine diesel engine. She was registered under the Canal Boats Act on March the 15th, 1938 at Rickmansworth for use as a dwelling by a crew of up to 2 adults and 2 children. Gainsborough seems to have been in continuous traffic until 1963, passing to British waterways in 1948 on nationalisation. She had a major dry docking at Bullsbridge in 1957 when the hold was refitted and other extensive steelwork repairs were carried out. She was sold to the Willow Wren in 1963, but does not appear to have been put into traffic by them, probably being used simply as a source of national engine spares. In the early 1960s, she was amongst 8 motorboats stored in the reservoir at Braunston, which now forms part of the marina. She was sold to the Aylesbury Boat Company with a national engine in 1965 and was converted for use as a pleasure boat and as a home at Aylesbury in the late 1960s. She passed to the present owner in July 1979 and is used residentially on the Bridgewater Canal near Manchester. Sculptor is part of the National Waterways Museum collection and is normally on view at the Canal Museum in Stoke Bruerne. Built by Yarwoods in Northwich in 1935 as part of an extensive new fleet of boats for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company, she is of iron composite construction. She is in wartime condition, apart from the 1960 Lister HA2 air-cooled engine, which replaces the Russell Newbury water-cooled twin that was originally fitted. Her history in commercial carrying is uncertain. She was allocated to the London Fire Service as a fireboat during the war, and in 1949 became a maintenance boat on the Shropshire Union Canal. She remained there in that capacity until restoration for the museum. Sculptor is crewed by the Canal Museum Education Officer, Brian Collins. Petrel is a Joshua motorboat, number 81. She was built in 1914 for the FMC at Saltley and was the 13th motorboat built by them for their carrying fleet. Originally fitted with a Bollender semi-diesel, she now has a Lister HR2. Petrel was purchased by the present owner, Duncan Pottinger, in 1981 from UCC here at Braunston. He used her for carrying and camping. She still has a commercial licence and, like many boats here today, is used for carrying whenever possible. Barnet, seen here steered by that great promoter of the waterways, Chris Coburn, was built in 1936 by Harland & Wolff of North Woolwich. She's a Type D town-class boat built of riveted steel. She eventually passed into British Waterways hands following the nationalisation of the waterways, when she was used as a maintenance boat. She ended up being used as a mudhopper. Earlier this year, the boat was restored to resemble a 1960s maintenance boat. Greyhound was built by Yarwoods for Fellows Morton and Clayton in 1926. She was in regular service before the 1950s with the Butty Kimberley. Then she was used for maintenance purposes at Hill Morton, during which time the original Bollender engine was replaced with a Lister FR3. Ownership passed to Arthur Mackey in the early 1970s, and she was worked extensively on the canals in the Black Country, by which time the original cabin was replaced by a small day cabin. In 1986, Greyhound was completely rebuilt to her original specification, which included a Bollinger engine, and she now carries on a regular basis. Radiant and Regulus were the first of 8 pairs of narrowboats constructed of steel with a V-shaped bottom, built at W.J. Yarwood's and Sons Yard at Northwich in Cheshire in 1935 and 1936. Radiant spent almost all of its life in active work, only coming out of service as a maintenance boat with British Waterways on the Gloucester and Sharpness Ship Canal in September 1992. During World War II, Radiant was used as a fireboat by the London Fire Brigade, based at Paddington Basin. The Butty Regulus is in the colour scheme it had when launched with Radiant on November the 14th, 1935. It has had a varied life, at different times being a pumping boat and a mudhopper on the River Avon, where it subsequently remained derelict for a number of years. Regulus was rescued and restored in the early 1970s and was well known for carrying coal commercially, paired with the motor Rufford. Radiant and Regulus were reunited in May 1993 and are privately owned. They are normally moored at the Boat Museum at Ellesmere Port. Birmingham is a big Woolwich motorboat built in 1935 again by Harland and Wolff for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company. She's 71 feet long by 7 foot beam with a 3 foot 9 inches draft when loaded, and she again is constructed from riveted steel. One of a fleet of 30, she carried mostly from Birmingham. Originally paired with a butty, they were intended to carry 70 tons per pair boat, but the limited draft meant that 50 to 55 tons was a more likely maximum. La Certa was built in July 1935 at Northwich by W.J. Yarwood and Sons Limited for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company. She was part of an order placed for 42 pairs of boats, of which 12 orders went to Yarwoods at a cost of £1,250 per pair. The original construction was wrought iron sides, elm bottom and a steel cabin, and she was initially fitted with a Russell Newbery DM2 engine. The L-type Star Class were not often favoured by boatmen for 2 reasons. The back cabin had minimal lining, and as a consequence they were cold in the winter and hot in the summer. And secondly, they had a much smaller carrying capacity than the Town Class, so they couldn't earn as much. Skylark is one of the original Cowburn and Cowper boats built in 1934. All the 8 Cowburn Cowper boats were named after birds beginning with the letter S. In this case, Skylark has an original Gardner hot bulb semi-diesel engine. Note the pronounced pointed stern on Skylark. This was so that any craft behind, including its own butty, wouldn't ram them hard but be deflected off to one side. This was especially important on these particular boats because they tended to carry extremely nasty cargoes, such as dangerous chemicals and volatile liquids. Lamprey was built by Yarwoods of Northwich in August 1934 for the FMC. Built with a single-cylinder 9-horsepower Bollinger semi-diesel engine and a 4-cabin, she was allocated to the Northern Fleet and worked mainly from Birmingham. She operated as a single motor without a butty. 1 year internationalisation, she passed into the ownership of British Waterways and operated as part of their Northern Fleet. She lay at the BW yard at Northwich along with several other boats until she was moved to the Boat Museum at Ellesmere Port in 1980. And after being bought by the present owner, Lamprey was totally rebuilt by Ian Kemp and enjoyed its first voyage painted again in FMC old colours in 1990. Appropriately, the journey was back to the site of Yarwood's Boatyard, the occasion being the 150th anniversary of boat building on the site. Grange was first built in 1912 by Braithwaite and Kirk at West Bromwich on the Wednesbury Old Canal. She was the first butty boat this company ever built for the FMC. She was constructed of riveted iron with an elm bottom. She was found by the present owners at Allen's Yard, Oldbury, and rebuilt to her present state by Simon Wayne between 1988 and 1989. The old stern of Grange was turned into the fore end of another boat and named Grange End. The engine is a Kelvin diesel with a hand petrol start and was bought new in 1939 for just £350. The Kelvin engine was originally in a naval craft that was involved in the Dunkirk evacuation. The present owners are a Mr. and Mrs. Case. Clematis is a Josher built for Fellows Morton and Clayton in 1935 by Yarwoods of Northwich. Her fleet number was number 331. She spent most of her time on the Bridgewater Canal. She has an open hull right down to the base plates. She would originally have had an elm bottom. Gifford was built by nurses of Braunston in 1926 and is the sole survivor of a large fleet of horse-drawn wooden narrowboats operated by Thomas Clayton of Oldbury. She's a bulk liquid carrier used for tar and gas oil, which was kept separate from the living accommodation by a cofferdam. Reversing with a Bollinger engine is an art form in itself, as they have no reverse gear. What you have to do, and which is being so ably demonstrated here, is to let her slow right down to stalling speed. Then, at the point of stall, the engine kicks back and you change the valve timing to run backwards. Of course, if you're approaching lock gates too fast and you get it wrong, you're probably going to demolish them. Oh, just listen to that wonderful hit and miss sound as the steerer winds open the speed wheel.
Close the engine down very, very slow, and then reverse the actual engine, that piston, crankshaft and flywheel in the opposite direction before you go astern.
Renfrew was built by Harland and Wolff, North Woolwich, one of a batch of 24, built for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company and delivered in March 1937. She was registered under the Canal Boat Act in March 1938 at Rickmansworth for use as a dwelling with a crew of up to 2 adults and 2 children. She was in continuous traffic until 1963, after BW acquired her in 1948 on nationalisation.
Until 1963, after the government in 48 on nationalisation.
Now, Sharpness is a really interesting boat. She was built in 1908 by Isaac J. Abdili and Mitchell Limited at Brimscombe Port on the Thames and Severn Canal for use on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal as both a tunnel tug and an icebreaker. She replaced one of their wooden tunnel steam tugs and is unique, as her sisters Worcester and Birmingham were only built as tugs with a straight stem. Sharpness has a raked stem to allow her to ride up on the ice and use her weight to break a way through. Her current owners purchased her in 1995 off the bank at Little Bedwin and had her moved to Ratcliffe-on-Soar to rebuild the hull. The intention was to retain as much of the original hull as possible by cutting out the poor platework and letting in new above the waterline and overplating beneath it right down to the keel. The present owner has completely rebuilt a 1932 Gardner 4L2 found as scrap, and it is now coupled to a variable output hydraulic drive in its own engine room. Shackleton is a wooden BCN ice boat built in 1934. She was one of the many ice boats needed to keep the Worcester and Birmingham Canal open over its high plateau. They could cope with up to 12 inches of ice, including previously broken ice that had refrozen. Icing on the BCN caused many problems and much expense for the company. Records show, for example, that in one particularly bad year, 542 men and 288 horses were employed for ice breaking between the 20th and the 25th of February. It was also a dangerous business. Extracts from the records show the hazards that icebreakers were subjected to, with 4 men receiving serious disabling injuries in a single week. Squire is one of the oldest boats in the parade, built in 1896 for J. Gillard of Tipton. The original gauging was carried out at Tipton on July the 29th of that year, where she was described as an open iron boat number 3. When gauged, the extreme length was recorded as 71 foot 6 inches and the extreme width as 7 foot and a half inch. The original construction was of riveted wrought iron plates. At some time she was rebottomed and refooted using steel plates and riveted. A weight alteration on the gauging sheet in February 1929 suggests that this is when the work was carried out. Alterations on the gauging sheet also gives the names of the later owners G. Bayliss, G&S Gold and AH Limited, but with no indication of the dates. At some time, she passed into the ownership of Stewarts and Lloyds, probably by takeover of the then owners. Stewarts and Lloyds later became the British Steel Corporation. The boat was purchased from the Stewarts and Lloyds Coombs Wood Tube Works in 1976, where she had been used to move tubes within the works and out to Horn Basin for delivery. During the next 3 years, she was converted to a traditional motor with back cabin and engine room, the hull modifications being carried out in the horseboat dock at Stone. A Lister FR3 marine engine and gearbox was installed, this having previously been fitted in the Joshua Owl, and before that in a sea fishing boat. The last major work carried out was a second rebottoming and refooting, this time with 3/8 inch steel bottom. The home mooring for Squire is at Western Wharf in Stratford-upon-Avon. Starling is another of those 8 Cowburn and Cowper boats built in 1934 and named after birds beginning with S. Unlike Skylark and many of the others, Starling has a rounded stern, but she was built for the carriage of volatile liquid cargoes. Elizabeth is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, converted narrowboats around today. She started life as a nameless, single-ended, horse-drawn cargo boat sometime in the 19th century, working on the Birmingham Canal navigations. The hull was originally made from riveted iron, but some of the later work also used riveted and welded steel. Her final job on the BCN was carrying coke. Saltaire is a large Northwich town-class motorboat. She was built in 1936 at Northwich by W.J. Yarwood and Sons for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company, and used by that company for general carrying work, mostly between London and Birmingham. She was originally paired with the Butty Saltfleet and became part of the British Waterways Fleet on nationalisation in 1948. She was employed for a number of years carrying concrete piles from Marsworth. In the early 1960s, she was modified for maintenance duties in the London area. She was purchased by the present owner, Mike Harrison, in 1987 and restored to carrying condition. The engine is a Lister HR2. Buckton was built in 1936 by Harland and Wolff at their North Woolwich yard. She's a big Woolwich, built for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company. These big Woolwich boats were built to get the absolute maximum amount of tonnage into a boat. The great high bluff bows enabled her to squeeze as much revenue-earning goods as possible through a narrow lock. Buckton, together with her then butty Brighton, holds the record for the absolute maximum load tonnage of goods in a narrowboat on a long-distance journey. She still has her original national diesel engine and still has a cargo carrying licence.
Next we have Buckton.
And this is Buckton's old butty Brighton. The record they set together was to carry 63 tons of wheat from Brentford to Wellingborough.
Here we have
Nuneaton was built by W.J. Yarwoods of Northwich and launched in 1936. She was originally fitted with a national diesel engine and cost just £900. Her original pairing was with the large butty Nunhead. Nuneaton is currently operated by the Narrowboat Trust. Fellows Morton and Clayton Limited were the giant of pre-nationalisation carrying fleets. Started in 1837 by James Fellows in West Bromwich, the company expanded rapidly. They concentrated mainly on long-distance traffic. Sometime around 1860, James Fellows died and his son Joshua took over. The boatman's name for boats built by or for the FMC is a Josher, after Joshua Fellows, who became one of the most respected and successful leaders of the industry. In 1876, Frederick Morton joined Fellows, bringing with him the extra capital needed for expansion. In 1889, a new limited company was formed, Fellows Morton and Clayton Limited, which took over all the boats of the previous company, along with some boats and assets held by Claytons of Saltley and Oldbury. Fellows Morton and Clayton were appointed directors, and their families took most of the shares. The early FMC boats were horse-drawn, working long distances up and down the country. There were, however, a few wooden steamers built at Saltley. The breakthrough for FMC came in 1912, when the first Swedish Bollander engine was commissioned. By 1935, 100 motorboats had been built by or for the FMC. In 1948, after most of the canals were nationalised, Fellows Morton and Clayton was still a family-controlled business. They made their first trading loss that year, and the future looked bleak. In November of that year, the decision was taken to go into voluntary liquidation. By so doing, the company left the canal trade with dignity, instead of watching their trade slowly disappear. The canals were never quite the same again. Faisley was part of the FMC fleet, paired with the motor Clover, and these two can often be seen in or around Stoke Bruin, where they're based. Faisley was built at Saltley in Birmingham in 1921. She's now part of the Captain Cargo fleet, and in July 1995 she and Clover loaded a consignment of grain at Newbury, the first to be carried on the canal since the 1970s, and took it to Allied Mills in Tewkesbury. The Viceroy was built at Saltley in 1910 and first registered in December of that year, 6 months later than President. They carry consecutive numbers, President being 195 and Viceroy 196. Viceroy worked between London, Braunston, Birmingham and Leicester, and was apparently the last steamer to be converted to a motorboat in December 1927. Viceroy's working life came to an end after the war, and sadly she finished her days submerged here at Braunston. She was restored in the late 1970s and transported by road to the Kennet and Avon Canal near Bath, where she operated as a trip boat by the Bristol Narrowboat Company. In 1986 she was purchased by Heldite Limited, the jointing compound manufacturers, and partly fitted out with an undercloth conversion to provide living facilities.
They had to have a boiler and
Aquarius was built in 1935, again for the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company.
And if the steerer will be more than happy to tell you all about their boat tomorrow is great. So-called after the style of painting, if I understand it. You look at the roses on the side.
Sweden was built in 1921 by the Anderton Company at their yard in Middleport near Stoke-on-Trent. Although built as a horse-pulled boat, she was converted to a motorboat only 5 years later. However, she retained her distinctive rounded cross-section that allows these knobstick boats, as they're called, to swim so well. In 1948, the Anderton Company sold Sweden to Henry Seddon & Sons. It joined a small fleet of boats carrying salt from their works in Middlewich, much of it going to Anderton to be transshipped into barges on the River Weaver. Seddons sold all their 11 boats in 1960. Since then, Sweden has been a pleasure boat, a trip boat, and a working boat, and even a sunk boat. Sweden was rebuilt between 1987 and 1988 using traditional methods and materials, and she's been painted in the livery of Henry Seddon & Sons. Some of the original cabin paintings still survive. These ancient craft that we've seen in this video were the lorries of their day. They and the canal system provided a transport infrastructure that spearheaded the development of Britain from a horse and cart 18th century agricultural economy to the thrusting industrial economy of the Victorian era. The canal companies were every bit as revolutionary and the technology just as exciting as the high-tech companies of today. Unlike today, many fortunes were made and many hopes were dashed on the roller coaster ride of a rapidly evolving industry. Then came the railways, which were so much faster and so much more efficient than the canals. As they grew and prospered, the canals went into terminal decline. Originally, most of the boatmen lived on the land, but as the trade dwindled, more and more were forced to live aboard with their families in tiny, cramped cabins. Today, that's seen by many as a romantic, nomadic way of life. In fact, it was a desperately isolated and hard existence lived out in the iron grip of poverty. 1948 saw nationalisation, the winding up of canal haulage companies and the mass destruction of narrowboats. Some of the last surviving examples of these boats came to Braunston in 1999 and have been shown to you here on this video. Many had been sunk for decades in watery graves at Braunston and up in Cheshire. They have been refloated, salvaged, restored, and in some cases virtually rebuilt by the hard work and sometimes the hard-earned cash of a handful of obsessive enthusiasts and volunteers. It is to those people that this programme is dedicated.